Hi, Peace with Endo community. How are you tonight? Thanks so much for taking the time to watch the replay of this video. If you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to drop them in the comment section below. I do check back on those when I'm done. If you are new to the page, my name is Aubrey Daimler. I am an author and wellness coach who helps women with endometriosis to naturally manage pain, increase energy, and find peace with endo. So, Peace with Endo had its 6th birthday this week. It was back on Sunday on the 16th when I initially wrote my first blog post over at peacewithendo.com, and it's amazing that it's been 6 years now since I first started Peace with Endo and first put my voice out there into the intranet. And I remember when I first started that I was afraid to put my voice out there, to put my name out there. It took me a long time to reveal who I really was. For so long, I just used the name Peace with Endo. And then slowly I came out and used my name, Aubrey. And it took a long time for me to actually use my full name, Aubrey Daimler, up until the point where I released my first book out into the world, which was Finding Peace with Endo, or From Pain to Peace with Endo. And that was almost 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years in November when I released that book out into the world. And I remember with that too, being very afraid to put my voice out there, to share my story and all that's come along with this journey of having endometriosis and everything that's come along with that. So I'm sure that there are those of you that can relate to being afraid to speak up about a condition that we don't always talk about. For whatever reason in society, you know, the topic of women's health tends to be a bit taboo. So I know in connecting with some of you that there is that fear and that shame that can come along with this and not really using your voice to speak up about it. But I can tell you from experience, you know, after 6 years now of Peace with Endo, after publishing my first book, that it's been incredibly healing for me to open up and to share about endometriosis and about all that's come along with it. And it's allowed me to connect with you. So thank you for being here and being part of this community, because I know I've seen the ripple effect happen by me opening up and sharing my story and inspiring others of you to share your story as well. So this came up also this week as I released a new podcast episode with a fellow endo sister named Tiffany Blair. If you didn't catch that, you can check it out over at peacewithendo.com, or I can drop a link here when I'm done. And it was called Finding Pain Through Purpose. And I very much related to Tiffany's story of having endo and having past trauma and having a lot of things happen to her. And her path of healing ultimately came when she started to speak her truth. Hey Marcia, thanks for joining. If you are watching live, go ahead and say hi. I love to know who's here. If you're watching the replay, type replay in the comments. I love to know who's joining us. So one big thing, again, for Tiffany was she started to speak up. She started to speak her truth to people that she had in her life. And she started to stand up for herself. So one thing that we talked about in the podcast episode was being an empath. And, you know, how she first realized that she was an empath, what an empath is, and how that being an empath can attract different types of personalities into your life. When you are an empath, it's when you pick up on other people's energies, you can pick up on other people's emotions, on other people's stuff. So you're very sensitive to outside energy. So that's something I discovered over the past couple of years, and it was very life-changing for me to discover that about myself. But it also made me realize that, I've struggled throughout my life to speak up, to speak my truth. And I think a lot of that connects to being an empath and having that fear of how people are going to react when you do say something that's from the heart, that maybe is something personal or whatever it is, or maybe it's something that they're not going to like when you say it, right? When you do speak your truth and you stand up for yourself, and getting that type of reaction from that person and being an empath and actually picking up on that energy. So that's something I continue to work with. For me, having the desire to avoid any type of confrontation with people because I don't like getting that negative response. So if you can relate to this, if you are an empath or if you are very sensitive to outside energy, drop me some comments and let me know how that's worked out in your life as well. Because I know it's not an easy thing. It's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? So Tiffany and I talked a little bit more about that in the podcast episode. If you haven't checked it out, I invite you to do so. And I think one thing that I've learned now as I'm approaching releasing a second book in February, this one's called Energetics of Endo. And this is also a very personal part of my story. And along the way, I've had my own fears of writing this new book and coming out with stuff that's quote unquote woo-woo, if you're into the woo-woo side of things, getting into energy, getting into more of the emotional, spiritual type of components that can come from healing. And I've had my own fears of coming out and speaking out about some of this stuff. I think more or less within my own family type unit, growing up in a belief system, a faith type belief system, and a lot of what I'm sharing is kind of counter to what I was raised in, what my parents believe in. So I think I have that own internal fear of kind of breaking through that and sharing my truth, of sharing who I am and my story and how I got to where I am today. But I can tell you again, by doing so, that it's so freeing to come out and to speak your truth. So one thing that came up as I was writing this book and working with different healers, hey Marcia, thanks for watching, is my main issue when it comes to my chakras, when it comes to my energy system, is all up here in my throat area. And if you get into the energetics of Endo, your throat area, that throat chakra, it's all about speaking your truth. And it's very much connected physically and energetically to that sacral space, which is your pelvic space where all your reproductive organs are. You've got a long nerve that goes all the way from your sacral space up to your throat, up to your brain, the vagal nerve, if you're familiar with that. So your throat actually very much impacts your sacral space on a physical as well as energetic level. So when you talk, when you speak, when you sing, when you hum, when you chant, anything that's coming from your throat space is actually stimulating that nerve, and it helps to calm things down and actually lowers down inflammation down in your pelvic space, which is interesting, right? So these two are very much connected. So as you get in the habit of speaking up and using your voice, you're actually positively impacting your sacral space. So I think, so that was one big thing that I identified in writing the book and that whole journey that happened. Again, Energetics of Endo is coming out in February 22nd. It is available now for pre-order. If you want to be the first one to get a signed copy, you can head on over to peacewithendo.com and order yours there. But really, what inspired me then through this journey was, okay, I need to clear my throat space. So I started the podcast. A couple of years ago, the Peace with Endo podcast. And I've been having different guests on there come on and share their story as well. And I know that for some, that's a big deal, coming out and being open and free about your story and sharing this physically through your throat space. So if you are inspired to do that, I'm always looking for guests on the podcast. If you are someone who has a story to share, a positive story or something that you feel would serve the Peace with Endo community, if you are a coach or an entrepreneur that maybe offers something that would serve the community, I love chatting with other entrepreneurs, other creatives, and just many of you that may have a story and what you've learned from it. So if that's of interest to you, I invite you to schedule a time to do an interview with me. I could drop a link to that in the comments as well, or you can head on over to peacewithendo.com. Under the Work With Me tab, there's a place to schedule an interview to be on the podcast. Marcia says, yes, empath trying to speak truth, but it's difficult due to negative reactions. Yes, totally. I understand that completely. So it does take some courage, right, to get past that fear. But again, it is very freeing to stand up for yourself and to speak your truth, even if that person isn't going to like what you have to say. I think a big part of healing, especially when you're following this holistic journey, is learning to stand up for yourself. And even having endo, right? Dealing with the medical system, dealing with the doctor-patient type relationship. I know a lot of times, a lot of you are having to see multiple doctors, or maybe you don't like what somebody says, or you have to go over and over to get anybody even to listen to you. So I do feel like within the endo community, within this experience of having something that's brushed off, that takes an average of 8 years to get diagnosed, that a lot of us are going to have issues in that throat space because we've been shut down. We've been told, you know, this is not, it's all in your head, or whatever you hear, or it's not a big deal, you know, this pain is normal. So learning to speak up even in that doctor-patient relationship is huge as well. So, and I know being an empath, having that fear of reaction, and also being a people pleaser, I think that naturally comes with being an empath, because you want that positive reaction, you want to feel good around other people, comes into play as well. So this does take some work for sure, and it takes some courage, but I encourage you to do so, and to step over that fear and to actually speak your truth, because I believe when you do so that you step into a greater path of healing. So again, if you're interested in coming on the podcast and using and clearing your throat chakra, sharing your story, or if you have a product or a service that would serve the community, I invite you to schedule time with me. I'll drop a link to where you can do that in the comments, or again, you can head on over to peacewithendo.com. Under the Work With Me tab, there's a link there to schedule time. So I hope that this inspires you tonight, and just remember that throat and your pelvic space are totally connected. So even by speaking, by singing, by chanting, you're actually benefiting that pelvic space and lowering down inflammation in your body. So speak up, share your story, release that fear of being the true you. So I'm sending you all so much love. Mwah. Thank you for listening tonight. If you did find this to be helpful, I invite you to share with your friends. Drop me some hearts. And if you want to catch me when I'm live next time, hit the little dots at the corner and get live notifications, and you can catch me when I'm live next time. But thank you again for listening tonight. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat again soon. Bye for now.